He said the wolf spoke to him. That's what the boy told the police, sitting there in his muddy hoodie, fingers twitching on the metal edge of the interview chair, eyes hollow like he'd looked too long at something no one his age should ever see. He was 12. And his story didn't make sense, at least, not at first. The wolf, he claimed, had come to him behind the old gas station off County Road 12. It didn't snarl or growl. It didn't attack. It just stood there, staring. Then it turned and walked into the woods like it expected him to follow. So he did. And that's how they found the grave. It had been hidden for nearly 40 years. 3 days before that, everything was normal. The town of Elkhorn didn't have much going on. Just a scatter of weather-worn houses, a shuttered movie theater with letters missing from the marquee, and a diner that still smelled like the 80s, cheap coffee, burnt bacon grease, and Marlboros baked into the wallpaper. Jamie's mom worked the register at the pharmacy. His dad, well, no one really asked where his dad was anymore. And Jamie, he was the kind of kid who slipped through the cracks. Too quiet. Too thin. Always smelling like wet leaves and wood smoke, like he spent more time outside than in. Kids at school called him Ghost Boy. He didn't fight it. That Monday started cold, not winter cold, but that sharp, wet kind of April morning that seeps into your bones and makes your skin feel thin. Jamie cut across the backfield behind his trailer like always, boots squelching through the mud, backpack bouncing. He didn't go to school. Not that day. He never told anyone why he veered off the trail. Not even after everything. But around noon, he showed up at the sheriff's office looking pale and shaken, a mess of twigs in his hoodie and dirt under his nails. Said he needed to talk to someone. Said he'd found something in the woods. Said the wolf showed him. Detective Claire Behrens hadn't planned on staying in Elkhorn past last winter. The department was understaffed, underfunded, and constantly teetering on the edge of shutdown. But something about the town, the weird silence of it, the way people didn't look at each other, stuck to her. She'd grown up in a place like this. Maybe that's why, when the dispatcher said we've got a kid here talking about a grave, she didn't roll her eyes. She went down to the interview room. Jamie was chewing at his thumbnail, staring at the table like it had betrayed him. She noticed the mud on his jeans wasn't just surface level, it was worked in, like he'd been crawling. "What did you find?" Claire asked. He didn't look at her. "There's bones," he mumbled. "A hand. Sticking up. Like it wanted out." "Where?" "Near the quarry. Past the no trespassing signs. Behind the old power lines." She leaned in. "And the wolf?" Jamie blinked. "It didn't talk. Not with words. But I knew what it meant." Claire took a deputy, drove out past the old quarry, just like Jamie said. The wind had picked up, not gusty, just constant, like it was whispering through the trees. The ground was soggy, the kind of mud that pulls at your boots like it's trying to swallow you. They found the spot by the tree with the slanted trunk, where the moss grows like a stain. And just like the boy said, a hand. Grayish. Weathered. Fingernails split and curled. No coffin. Just earth. By the time forensics came through, they'd already roped off the area. Sheriff Hightower swore under his breath, staring at the bones like they were a personal insult. "You think the kid planted it," he muttered. Claire shook her head. "No way in hell. It's old. Decades, maybe. Then what the fuck was he doing out here?" She didn't answer. The town buzzed quiet. Elkhorn didn't do big news well. People gossiped in half whispers over meatloaf at the diner, all while pumping gas with one eye on the woods. They didn't like questions. And they didn't like answers even more. Especially not when they started pointing backwards. Jamie didn't go home that night. Child Services set him up in a room above the fire station, just until things were cleared up. No one wanted to say what cleared up meant. The kid didn't talk much after that. just stared out the window like he was waiting for something. Claire visited him the next day. Brought him a sandwich and one of those root beers in a glass bottle, hoping it would soften the edges a bit. He didn't touch either. "You were right," she told him. "It was a grave. They're saying it's been there a long time." Jamie didn't flinch. "It wanted me to find it," he said. Claire frowned. "The wolf?" He nodded slowly. She? Jamie finally looked at her. His eyes weren't haunted, they were focused. Like he saw something she didn't. "She didn't show me it to scare me. She showed me because no one else would." The bones turned out to belong to a female, late teens or early 20s. No ID, no clothing, no jewelry. The skull was cracked, clean, intentional. Whoever buried her hadn't cared about being found. They hadn't planned to be found. Dental records were a dead end. Cod was blunt force trauma. Time of death, 1986. Give or take. That was the year Angela Moore disappeared. Claire found the case buried under a stack of misfiled reports in the basement archives, back when everything was still on paper, yellowed and curling. Angela had been 19. A waitress at a truck stop diner that burned down in the early 2000s. Vanished one night walking home. No leads. No body. Just a mother who called the station every week for 6 years until she stopped. The thing was, Angela had lived a mile from Jamie's trailer. Same woods. Same path. Claire called the lab. "I need DNA," she said. "Compare it to Angela Moore. Fast." That night, Claire drove out to the woods. Something didn't sit right. She parked at the edge of the quarry and walked in alone, flashlight sweeping wide arcs through the darkness. Every sound felt bigger than it should, the crunch of leaves, the snap of branches, her own breath. When she got to the site, the ground was still disturbed, raw and gaping like a wound. No police tape. Someone had cut it. Her throat tightened. She spun in a circle, light catching nothing but trees and more trees. Then she saw it, just at the edge of the clearing. A shape. Low to the ground. Still. It was a dog. No, bigger. A wolf. It didn't run. Didn't growl. Just watched. And then it turned. Walked into the trees. Claire followed. Claire's footsteps crunched through the underbrush as she trailed the wolf deeper into the forest. The beam of her flashlight cut a narrow path through the gloom, illuminating only the immediate patch of ground before her. Every rustle of leaves or creak of a branch made her heart pound faster, as if the forest itself were conspiring to keep its secrets hidden. The wolf moved with an uncanny grace, its thick fur catching the moonlight in flashes of silver. It didn't look back, yet Claire felt an almost magnetic pull, compelling her to follow. The pursuit led her away from the familiar edges of the quarry and into a part of the wood she'd never known existed, an area where the trees clustered so densely they seemed to conspire in silence, their ancient trunks gnarled like the hands of forgotten storytellers. As she pressed on, the forest transformed from a place of muted routine into one where every detail was charged with a sense of foreboding. The wind had picked up again, carrying whispers that mingled with the soft cadence of her breath. Claire's thoughts turned to Angela Moore and the decades-old mystery that now linked her missing identity to this very night. There was a palpable connection, though how or why, she could not yet discern. The trail of the wolf wound through a narrow clearing ringed with skeletal remains of long-dead trees. Here, the atmosphere felt denser, as though the air itself was laden with memories. Claire paused to catch her breath. The soft light of her flashlight revealed a faint inscription carved into a fallen log, a series of initials and a date, nearly illegible under the encroaching vines. It struck her as disturbingly deliberate, as if someone had left a marker not just for themselves, but for a future searcher. The initials AM were barely visible. A chill swept over her. It had to be Angela Moore. A low, distant howl soon broke the heavy silence, echoing off the distant hills. The sound wasn't angry or mournful, it was almost resigned. The wolf had stopped and turned, its head cocked as if listening to the whisper of the trees. For a long moment, Claire felt an overwhelming sorrow well up inside her, mixed with a fierce determination to unravel this mystery. She wasn't merely following a wild animal, she was following a thread woven through decades of silence and forgotten tragedy. Her mind raced back to the interview with Jamie. The boy's eyes had been fixed on something unseen, his expression a mixture of fear and profound understanding. The wolf, he had said, wasn't there to scare him. It had been guiding him. And now, as Claire followed its lead, she began to wonder if the wolf was less an animal and more a keeper of memories, a silent witness to the grim history of Elkhorn. The forest seemed to close in around her as she moved deeper into the heart of darkness. The moon, partially hidden by wispy clouds, offered little comfort. Shadows danced around her, and every step felt like a step back in time. The further she went, the more the modern world of Elkhorn faded, replaced by an almost palpable presence of past lives and unsolved sorrows. Then, unexpectedly, the wolf halted before a large boulder partially covered in moss and ivy. It sat regally, as if guarding a threshold. Claire edged closer, her pulse quickening. At the base of the rock, half buried in the earth, was a narrow opening that resembled a man-made passage. The sight was unnerving, the hidden recess carved into the natural formation, its entrance obscured by tangled roots and overgrown brush. It was unmistakably a grave, meticulously concealed from view yet now unmistakably exposed by time and nature's slow reclaiming. Claire knelt beside the opening, her gloved fingers brushing away layers of dirt and leaves. The smell of damp earth and decay mingled with a hint of something else, old smoke, like the remnants of a long-forgotten fire. The faint outline of a wooden box was visible, its corners softened by the years. She could see hints of metal, perhaps remnants of a locket or a piece of jewelry, embedded in the grime. The craftsmanship suggested that whoever had buried this grave had done so with a careful deliberateness, as though preserving a memory or protecting a secret. In that moment, every piece of the puzzle began to align. Angela Moore's disappearance was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, darker narrative that had seeped into the very soil of Elkhorn. The meticulous nature of the grave, the presence of the wolf, and the eerie silence of the forest together wove a tapestry of loss, neglect, and perhaps deliberate cover-ups. The hidden grave was not just a final resting place, it was a message. As Claire worked, the quiet was shattered by a distant, frantic rustling. Her senses flared, every instinct screamed caution. She straightened up, turning slowly toward the sound. The flashlight beam trembled in her hand as it swept across the undergrowth. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw movement, a dark shape dashing between the trees. The intensity of the moment was overwhelming, each second stretching into an eternity. The woods, which moments ago had been a repository of old secrets, now transformed into a stage for something far more immediate and dangerous. She backed away from the boulder, her eyes never leaving the dark shapes weaving through the foliage. The sound of hurried footsteps reached her ears, irregular, uneven, as if someone was fleeing in terror. Claire's mind churned with questions. Was this a local trying to escape the scene? Or perhaps another witness, like Jamie, pulled into a world of unspoken horrors? The detective's instincts, honed by years of unraveling cold cases and uneasy truths, told her that the night was far from over. A sudden, sharp crack of a branch to her left made her spin around. There, emerging from behind a thick clump of ferns, was a man. His face was partly obscured by a weathered cap and a tangle of dark hair, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and recognition. Without a word, he darted back into the shadows, leaving Claire with more questions than answers. Who was he? Had he seen something he shouldn't have? Or was he just another unwilling participant in a drama that had been unfolding long before either of them arrived? The encounter sent a ripple of unease through her. As she resumed her examination of the grave, her mind replayed every detail of the fleeting moment. The man's hurried departure, the unspoken terror in his eyes, it all added layers of complexity to an already convoluted case. Had someone been watching, orchestrating events from behind the scenes? The possibility chilled her to the core. Returning her focus to the grave, Claire carefully documented the site. Photographs were taken, measurements noted, every detail recorded meticulously. She knew that this evidence, though seemingly straightforward, was the key to unraveling the decades-old mystery of Angela Moore. Every scratch on the wood, every dent on the metal, could be a clue. Yet, the overwhelming sense of foreboding made it clear that there was more at stake here than just solving a cold case. This was a portal into a hidden chapter of Elkhorn's history, a chapter filled with secrets that many had hoped would remain buried. The wolf, still sitting quietly by the boulder, regarded her with an inscrutable calm. It seemed to have waited patiently, as if aware that its role was not yet finished. The animal's eyes glinted with an unsettling intelligence, and for a moment, Claire felt as if she were being assessed by something beyond the realm of ordinary nature. The tension of that unspoken moment vibrated in the air like a plucked string on a violin, its note haunting and unresolved. As dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the forest floor, Claire reluctantly tore herself away from the scene. The evidence was secure, the mystery had deepened, and her thoughts were a tangled web of questions and half-formed theories. The discovery of the hidden grave and the cryptic guidance of the wolf were not isolated incidents, they were part of a larger narrative that had been silently unraveling for decades. And somewhere out there, in the murky depths of Elkhorn's past, lay the truth about Angela Moore's fate. Driving back to the station in the early morning light, Claire's mind was ablaze with possibilities. Every road, every whisper of wind, every rustle in the dark held the potential for new revelations or deadly pitfalls. The town of Elkhorn was not merely a quiet backwater, it was a repository of secrets that had been carefully locked away by time, neglect, and perhaps deliberate malice. And now, with Jamie's eerie encounter and the enigmatic presence of the wolf, the case was unraveling in ways that defied simple explanation. Back at the station, the routine sounds of early morning, flipping through old case files, the hum of outdated computers, the murmur of tired officers, provided a stark contrast to the chaos of the night's discoveries. Claire sat at her cluttered desk, the evidence photographs spread out before her like pieces of a sinister jigsaw puzzle. The faces of those involved in Angela Moore's disappearance, long forgotten by the public but not by the records, loomed in her thoughts. How many more secrets lay hidden beneath the surface of Elkhorn? How many lives had been snuffed out quietly, their stories lost in the relentless passage of time? A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. One of the junior detectives, a sharp-eyed young woman named Lydia, stepped in hesitantly. "Detective Behrens, there's been another development. The lab called DNA analysis from the bones has come back. It matches Angela Moore's records." The confirmation hit Claire like a freight train. Every detail, every hunch now converged on one undeniable truth: Angela's disappearance was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated erasure of a life that had been deemed inconvenient by someone powerful enough to hide it for decades. But who? And why? Lydia continued, "There's something else. While reviewing old files, I found a series of letters sent by an anonymous source to the local paper in the late 80s. They hint at a cover-up linked to high-ranking officials in the town. The letters were unsigned, but one was marked with a symbol, a wolf's head. The wolf? Claire's pulse quickened again as she absorbed the implications. The animal that had led Jamie and her to the hidden grave was not just a creature of instinct. It was a symbol, a silent messenger of a deeper conspiracy that had haunted Elkhorn for years. The revelation cast the entire case in a new, ominous light. It wasn't simply about a missing woman and a hidden grave, it was about power, corruption, and the lengths to which some would go to keep the past buried. The day wore on with a relentless intensity. As Claire pored over the old letters and case files, the stark contrast between the seemingly mundane records and the explosive revelations became impossible to ignore. Every document hinted at a conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of local society, a network of individuals who had long operated in the shadows, manipulating events and silencing those who dared to speak the truth. Late that evening, when the station had finally quieted, Claire sat alone in her office, the weight of the day's discoveries pressing down on her. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the rhythmic ticking of the clock were the only sounds in the room. Yet, in her mind, the echo of the wolf's silent eyes, the boy's trembling confession, and the ghost of Angela Moore's untold story mingled into a cacophony of unresolved questions. In that moment, she resolved that the case would not end with the confirmation of Angela's identity. The hidden grave, the mysterious wolf, and the anonymous letters were pieces of a larger, far more disturbing puzzle, a puzzle that threatened to expose the dark underbelly of a town that prided itself on its quiet simplicity. Claire knew that if she were to bring justice for Angela, she would have to peel back the layers of secrecy one by one, even if it meant facing the unsettling truth about those who had built their fortunes on lies and betrayal. Outside, the night deepened, and a thin drizzle began to fall, the droplets tapping softly against the window. The rain washed away the grime of the day, but it couldn't cleanse the deep stains of history embedded in the town's memory. As Claire sat there, a profound sense of resolve settled over her. The case was far from closed. Instead, it had just begun to unravel, pulling her into a vortex of mystery and danger that promised to change everything she thought she knew about Elkhorn. In the quiet solitude of her office, Detective Claire Behrens began to draft a plan, a meticulous roadmap of interviews, evidence reviews, and late-night stakeouts. Every detail mattered. Every small clue could be the key to unlocking the sinister network that had hidden Angela's fate. And above all, the silent, watchful presence of the wolf loomed large in her thoughts, a living reminder that sometimes, the most elusive truths are guarded not by human hands, but by nature itself. The rain continued to fall, a persistent, rhythmic patter against the glass, as if urging her on. And in that sound, Claire found an unexpected comfort, a reminder that even in the midst of darkness, nature had its own way of speaking the truth. With a deep, steadying breath, she turned her attention back to the scattered pieces of evidence before her, determined to follow every lead, no matter how deep or disturbing it might be. Every photograph, every note, every whispered rumor was now a stepping stone towards a revelation that had been buried for far too long. The hidden grave was not just a physical remnant of a past life, it was a testament to a town's collective silence, a grim reminder of the cost of secrets. And as the night deepened, so did the mystery, drawing Claire into a labyrinth of memory, fear, and unresolved grief that would eventually demand a reckoning. In the coming days, she would have to confront not only the darkness of Elkhorn's history, but also the shadows within herself. The case was a mirror reflecting her own fears, her own doubts, and the relentless drive to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And as she prepared for the next phase of her investigation, the wolf's enigmatic presence continued to haunt her dreams, a silent sentinel in a world where every truth had its price. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with hidden dangers and unexpected betrayals. Yet Claire felt a fierce determination stirring within her, a promise to Angela, to the boy who had been touched by something beyond his years, and to all those whose voices had been silenced by the relentless march of time. The darkness was deep, but the light of truth, however faint, was a beacon she could not ignore. In that moment, beneath the relentless patter of the rain, Detective Claire Behrens made a silent vow: she would follow the trail of secrets, no matter where it led, until every hidden truth was brought into the light. The day after the rain-soaked night, Elkhorn awoke under a heavy, leaden sky that seemed determined to hold onto its secrets. Detective Claire Behrens returned to the scene with renewed determination, the weight of Angela Moore's unsolved disappearance pressing on her every step. She parked her car at the edge of the woods, where the forest had shifted from a realm of whispering memories into a stark landscape of blood and soil. The morning was quiet, almost oppressively so, as if the earth itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Claire's breath fogged in the cold air as she retraced her steps to the hidden grave. The boulder, half concealed by creeping ivy and stubborn brambles, looked every bit like a tombstone to a forgotten past. The wolf was nowhere in sight, as if it had melted into the shadows of dawn. Instead, the forest echoed with a silence that was almost unnatural. She approached the site cautiously, her every sense alert to even the slightest disturbance. Earlier that night, in the dim glow of her station's fluorescent lights, the implications of the anonymous letters had begun to take shape. The wolf's head emblem wasn't just a symbol, it was a signature. A mark left behind by someone who was as deeply entangled in the town's dark history as the case itself. With trembling hands, Claire spread out the letters on her desk, their yellowed paper and faded ink a stark reminder of a past that refused to stay buried. Each letter hinted at corruption, at powerful figures who had conspired to silence the truth. And now, that very conspiracy had reached into the woods to reclaim its forgotten victim. Returning to the grave, Claire found something new, a glint of metal partially obscured by tangled roots at the edge of the clearing. She knelt to carefully extricate it, her fingers brushing away layers of dirt and decay. It was a pendant, its surface intricately carved with a design that resembled intertwined vines. The delicate craftsmanship struck her as oddly personal, almost as if it had been made by someone who knew the victim intimately. A name was etched on the back in an elegant script, M.E. Could this be the missing piece that connected Angela Moore to a past far more complicated than anyone had imagined? Her pulse quickened. The discovery of the pendant was like a spark in a dark room. Suddenly, a corridor of possibilities opened before her. She bagged the item as evidence, carefully noting every detail. The atmosphere was electric, each breath a mingling of dread and anticipation, as though the forest itself had exhaled a long-held secret. Later that afternoon, in the sparse light of her cluttered office, Claire pored over old case files and public records. The town's records were a labyrinth of faded ink and smudged photographs, but somewhere in that chaos lay the answer. A name recurred in several files, a local businessman with a reputation for philanthropy by day and whispered scandals by night. Marcus Eldridge. His initials, M.E., matched those on the pendant. Eldridge had built his fortune on real estate and local investments, but rumors had long swirled around his connections to unsavory dealings. The more Claire dug into his history, the more she found discrepancies and dead ends. Interviews with long-retired town officials painted a picture of a man who had been both respected and feared. One particularly frail woman, who still remembered the old days of Elkhorn, confided to her that Eldridge had a hand in nearly every major event in town's history, often with a smile that masked a sinister intent. Her voice trembled as she recounted how he'd been involved in a land deal that had displaced dozens of families, and how his influence had once quashed an investigation into a local scandal. Armed with this information, Claire scheduled a visit to Marcus Eldridge's estate. The sprawling mansion, set on the outskirts of town, loomed like a fortress. Its manicured lawns and pristine facade betrayed nothing of the secrets it might harbor within. She drove up the long, winding driveway, each step closer to the mansion feeling like a step further into a carefully constructed labyrinth of lies and power. Inside, the atmosphere was one of sterile opulence. Claire was greeted by a somnolent receptionist, whose polite smile seemed rehearsed, as if she were playing a part in a well-practiced drama. The mansion itself was a study in contrasts. The lavish decor and gilded frames clashed with the cold precision of modern security systems. Every piece of art, every carefully positioned mirror, appeared chosen to distract from hidden depths. Marcus Eldridge was waiting in a study lined with dark wood and books that smelled of time and dust. He was an imposing figure, with a calm demeanor and eyes that seemed to measure her worth with a single glance. When Claire mentioned Angela Moore's case, his reaction was subtle, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. He listened with an attentive smile, though there was no warmth in it, only the cool calculation of someone used to having his secrets preserved. "Detective Behrens," he said smoothly, his voice even and measured, "I'm aware of the case. Angela Moore was a tragedy, a misfortune that no one should have to endure." His words were polite, but there was an undercurrent of something unspoken, something that hinted at deeper involvement. Claire pressed gently, laying out the evidence she had gathered so far, the pendant with his initials, the anonymous letters, and the consistent whispers of his name among those who remembered the past. Eldridge's smile didn't waver, but his eyes darkened. "The past," he murmured, "has a way of catching up with us all. Some things are meant to remain buried." The conversation grew taut, every sentence a careful dance around the truth. Eldridge offered no concrete alibi, no clear explanation of his connections to the case. His evasiveness only served to deepen Claire's suspicions. When the meeting ended, she left with more questions than answers, the weight of his ambiguous words echoing in her mind. Back in her car, the world outside felt different, each familiar landmark now a silent witness to the unfolding mystery. The crisp autumn air carried a sense of urgency, as if nature itself had aligned with her quest for the truth. Claire knew that the next step was to tie Marcus Eldridge's past directly to Angela Moore's disappearance. The pendant was a tangible clue, but it needed context. She decided to revisit the Old Town Archives, a dusty repository of public records and personal accounts, tucked away in a crumbling building at the heart of Elkhorn. Inside the archives, the smell of aging paper and the quiet rustle of turning pages created an almost sacred ambience. An elderly archivist, with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, guided her to a section of records that hadn't been touched in years. Claire's fingers brushed over brittle documents and faded photographs as she searched for any mention of Angela Moore and her connection to Eldridge. There, hidden in a ledger from the mid-1980s, she found a series of transactions that linked Eldridge's business to properties near the truck stop diner where Angela had worked. The records were sparse, deliberately vague, a few columns of numbers and dates that suggested an under-the-table deal. They hinted that Angela had once been involved in a community project funded by a trust associated with Eldridge's name. The trust, it appeared, had been set up to revitalize a part of the town that was rapidly being forgotten, but the details were murky, as though someone had scrubbed out the inconvenient parts of the story. A photograph slipped from between the pages, its edges frayed and corners curled. It showed a young woman, radiant in her youth, laughing in front of a rustic diner. The woman's eyes, captured in the faded light, held a mixture of hope and defiance, a snapshot of a life full of promise. Claire's heart tightened. This was Angela Moore, unmistakably. The photograph was a stark contrast to the cold, clinical records. It was a window into a past where dreams had been possible, now shattered by the passage of time and the machinations of powerful men. Armed with these new pieces of the puzzle, Claire returned to her station. The fluorescent hum of her office was a jarring reminder of the present, but her mind was miles away, navigating the dark corridors of Elkhorn's history. She laid out the photograph alongside the pendant and the anonymous letters. Each item was a testament to a story that had been left untold, a story of ambition, betrayal, and a deliberate attempt to erase a life that had mattered. That evening, as the sky turned a bruised purple and the first stars began to pierce the twilight, Claire found herself on a long, solitary drive back to the outskirts of town. The roads were empty, the world outside reduced to silhouettes of trees and the soft glow of distant streetlights. Her thoughts were heavy with the implications of what she had uncovered. Angela's case was evolving from a cold mystery into a battle against time and corruption, a fight that was as personal as it was professional. Her car's engine hummed a steady cadence, punctuating the silence with mechanical precision. In the back of her mind, she could still hear the soft, almost imperceptible rustle of pages turning in the archives and the measured, chilling cadence of Eldridge's words. With every mile she drove, the distance between the present and the past seemed to shrink until it felt like they were colliding head-on. The hidden narratives of a small town, cloaked in decades of silence, were now demanding to be heard. As she pulled up near her modest home, a small, unassuming cottage on the edge of town, Claire allowed herself a moment of reflection. The events of the past few days had transformed her view of Elkhorn. What had once seemed like an ordinary, sleepy town now revealed itself as a stage for secrets and lies, where every whispered rumor held a kernel of truth. The case was no longer just about Angela Moore, it was about the legacy of those who thought they could bury the past and the cost of their ambitions. Inside her home, over a single cup of lukewarm coffee, Claire reviewed her notes. The photograph, the pendant, the ledgers, and those ominous letters, the pieces were beginning to fit together, forming an intricate mosaic of deceit and hidden connections. There was a pattern emerging, one that linked Eldridge, the town's influential figures, and the dark undercurrents that had shaped Elkhorn for decades. The grave was not just a final resting place, it was a marker of a suppressed history, a testament to the length some would go to rewrite reality. Before long, the phone rang, a shrill sound that cut through the silence of the early evening. It was Lydia, her voice low and urgent. "Detective, you need to see this. There's been another anonymous tip, this time, it's a video. It shows someone at the old quarry last night, and the figure in the background, it looks like the man we saw in the woods." Claire's grip tightened on the phone. "Send it over," she said, her tone clipped with anticipation. As the video began to play on her screen, the grainy footage revealed a series of quick, disjointed images, a figure in a dark jacket, a flash of a familiar cap, and in one fleeting frame, the unmistakable glint of a wolf's eyes. The video was disorienting, the images fragmented and overlapping, but it was enough to confirm what she had suspected: there were more players in this mystery than she had initially realized. The evidence, the anonymous video, and the unsettling presence of the wolf had all converged to push the case into uncharted territory. Every piece of data was a challenge, a question waiting to be answered. Who was the mysterious man seen darting through the underbrush? How was he connected to Angela Moore's disappearance? And what did his presence signify about the ongoing cover-up? Claire knew that the path forward was fraught with danger. The deeper she dug, the more likely it was that she would uncover truths that powerful people had spent decades hiding. Yet the drive to unearth the truth burned brighter than her fear. She resolved to follow every lead, no matter how perilous it might be. That night, as she sat in her dimly lit office reviewing the video frame by frame, Claire felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The quiet determination in her eyes mirrored the silent promise she had made to herself to bring justice to Angela Moore and to all those who had been silenced by the machinations of Elkhorn's shadowy elite. Every new clue, every whispered name in the town's history, was a stepping stone along a treacherous path towards the truth. Outside, the wind howled through the barren trees, its sound a mournful symphony that resonated with the hidden grief of a town long burdened by secrets. In that eerie, restless night, Detective Claire Behrens understood that she was no longer merely chasing a ghost from the past. She was confronting a legacy of deceit and power, a legacy that would not yield its truths without a fight. In the deep silence of the midnight hour, as she prepared to delve deeper into the dark underbelly of Elkhorn's history, Claire's resolve hardened. The case was evolving into something much larger than a missing person investigation. It was a battle against the forces that had manipulated time and memory for far too long. With every clue uncovered, every connection made, she was dismantling a web of lies that had kept a small town captive to its own shadows. And as the rain began again, tapping softly against the windowpane like a persistent reminder of nature's unyielding honesty, Claire steeled herself for the challenges ahead. The truth was out there, hidden in plain sight among the remnants of the past, waiting to be revealed. And she would stop at nothing to ensure that every secret, every lie, and every lost voice was finally brought into the light. The following morning brought no relief, only a grey, drizzling persistence that matched the relentless murmur of unanswered questions in Elkhorn. Detective Claire Behrens emerged from her modest home with a heavy heart and a mind swirling with the fragments of evidence that had become both her obsession and her burden. In the pale light of early dawn, she returned to the Archives building, a crumbling relic at the center of town, where whispers of the past were recorded in brittle pages and faded photographs. Inside, the musty air carried the weight of decades, as if each document held a secret that begged to be discovered. Claire was determined to re-examine the ledgers and correspondence she'd found earlier, to decipher every cryptic note and hidden connection to Marcus Eldridge. While sorting through a disorganized stack of town records, Claire discovered a series of old police reports mentioning a sleeper informant, a local man known only by the initials JD. The reports, scattered among unrelated notes about minor disturbances, suggested that JD had once provided crucial information about unsolved cases. One report, in particular, detailed a tip about a clandestine meeting at the abandoned mill on the outskirts of town. The meeting was said to have involved figures of considerable influence, discussing matters that were never meant for public ears. Intrigued, Claire took careful notes. The abandoned mill was one of the few locations in Elkhorn that had remained untouched by the smooth veneer of progress. Once the heart of a bustling industry, it now stood as a silent, decaying monument to lost dreams, a perfect setting for clandestine meetings and whispered secrets. Later that afternoon, with the day growing dim and the chill of early autumn setting in, Claire drove to the mill. The long, dusty road felt like an invitation to step back in time. The structure emerged from the fog like a spectre, its broken windows and rusted gears a testament to a history of neglect. This was a place where time had seemingly stopped, a place where the past still breathed in every creaking board and splintered beam. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and each step sent plumes swirling in the stray beams of sunlight that penetrated through gaps in the roof. Claire's flashlight swept across the cavernous space, illuminating scattered remnants of old machinery and the faded graffiti of a younger era. Amid the decay, she found traces of recent activity, a discarded cigarette but footprints in the dust that hadn't fully set. It was clear someone had been here, and not long ago. Following the trail of evidence, Claire reached a secluded corner of the mill where a makeshift table had been set up. On it lay a tattered notebook and a set of photographs, yellowed but still legible. The notebook contained hurried scribbles, entries that chronicled meetings, names, and dates, all in a scrawled, almost frantic hand. In one entry, a name leapt out: J.D., meet at the mill, 9 p.m. Tell them everything. The handwriting was erratic, the ink smeared by either haste or a trembling hand. The photographs, scattered among the pages, depicted gatherings of men and women in darkened rooms, their faces solemn and secretive. One photo, in particular, showed a group huddled near a car in a narrow alley, a clandestine rendezvous that resonated with the mystery of Angela Moore's disappearance. A cold shiver ran down Claire's spine as she realized that the notebook might be the missing link in a puzzle that spanned decades. Here were clues pointing to a network of informants, powerful figures who had conspired to bury inconvenient truths and protect their own interests. The note suggested that J.D. had been an insider, someone with access to information that could unravel the carefully constructed facade of respectability maintained by the town's elite. With the notebook and photographs carefully bagged as evidence, Claire left the mill. Outside, the drizzle had turned into a steady rain, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the dark secrets of Elkhorn. Driving back through slick, rain-soaked streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that every drop of rain was washing away part of the town's facade, exposing the raw, painful truths underneath. Back at the station, Claire spent hours under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, meticulously cross-referencing the names and dates in the notebook with old case files and public records. The information was sparse, deliberately obscured by missing pages and redacted passages, yet one pattern began to emerge. Several names recurred, names linked to local construction companies, banking institutions, and even a few law enforcement officers who had long since retired. It was as if a web of complicity had been spun throughout the fabric of Elkhorn's community, a network designed to keep certain truths hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic indifference. Her concentration was broken by a sudden call over the phone, a terse, clipped voice from Lydia. "Detective Behrens, you need to come down to the evidence room. We've got a delivery that just came in." Intrigued, Claire made her way to the evidence room, where the hum of computers and the sterile smell of disinfectant were oddly comforting compared to the chaos of her investigation. Lydia handed her a small, unmarked envelope. Inside, wrapped in a piece of brown paper, was a USB drive. No note, no explanation, just the drive, its plastic casing slick with condensation. Back at her desk, Claire plugged the USB into her computer. A series of files and videos began to play, a mix of surveillance footage, audio recordings, and what appeared to be personal messages. One file, labeled with a date from the early 80s, caught her eye. It was a recording of a conversation, voices low and urgent. In the background, a faint but distinct sound of a wolf's howl punctuated the dialogue. The conversation hinted at a meeting to dispose of evidence, a meeting that was abruptly ended by a sudden commotion. The voices were unidentifiable, but one thing was clear: someone was desperate to cover their tracks. The video files were even more chilling. Grainy footage showed a dimly lit corridor, the camera swaying as if handheld. In one segment, a shadowy figure appeared briefly, face obscured by darkness, before vanishing around a corner. The camera panned to reveal what looked like a set of documents spread out on a table, financial records, names, and dates that seemed to corroborate the connections Claire had already suspected. Among the documents was a recurring symbol, the wolf's head, etched into the corner of a page, a silent signature of a conspiracy that had woven itself into every facet of the case. With the evidence now mounting, Claire felt the weight of responsibility press upon her even harder. Each new discovery was a shard of glass in a mosaic that was as beautiful as it was brutal. The town of Elkhorn, with its quiet streets and unassuming facades, was now a battleground of buried truths and whispered regrets. Every file, every record, every whispered clue was a testament to a legacy of secrets that had festered for far too long. Even as the rain continued to drum a relentless beat against the station's windows, Claire's mind raced with plans. The next logical step was clear. She needed to locate JD, whoever he was. He held the key to unraveling the final threads of the conspiracy. But tracking someone who had long since faded into the background of a town's collective memory would be no simple task. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. A senior officer, with a look of quiet determination, approached her desk. "Detective Behrens," he said in a low voice, "there's been a development in another case." A witness at a nearby property reported seeing someone matching the description of the mysterious man we encountered at the quarry. He was seen leaving a property that's been abandoned for years. "I suggest you pay a visit." The mention of the mysterious man, the one seen darting between the trees at the quarry, set her mind racing. The pieces were beginning to interlock in ways she hadn't anticipated. The man, the notebook, the USB drive with its damning footage, they all pointed to a larger force at work. One that had managed to cast its long shadow over Elkhorn, manipulating events from behind the scenes, and leaving behind a trail of sorrow and unanswered questions. With a deep, steadying breath, Claire gathered her notes, evidence, and the USB drive. The path forward was fraught with peril and uncertainty, but her resolve was unwavering. As she stepped out into the rain-slicked streets once more, the town of Elkhorn loomed before her, a tapestry of secrets woven into every crumbling building and silent alleyway. Somewhere in the labyrinth of its history lay the truth, waiting to be uncovered by someone brave enough to confront the darkness. The journey to unmask the hidden players of this decades-old conspiracy was only just beginning. Every shadow in the rain, every whisper in the wind, now carried the promise of revelation or retribution. And Detective Claire Behrens, armed with determination and a growing arsenal of evidence, was ready to chase down the last elusive threads that tied the past to the present, a pursuit that would lead her deep into the heart of a mystery as old as the town itself. Under the leaden sky of another relentless rain, Claire steeled herself for the final confrontation. The tip had led her to an abandoned estate on the outskirts of Elkhorn, a crumbling mansion veiled in wild ivy and shrouded by the overgrowth of forgotten years. Its once grand facade now lay in ruin, the broken windows staring blankly like dark, unblinking eyes. Somewhere in the depths of this desolation, Claire knew, lay the last of the answers. She parked a few hundred yards away, the wipers struggling against the sheets of rain, and walked the muddy path toward the mansion. Each step echoed on the worn stones, the sound swallowed by the relentless drumming of rain. In her pocket, the USB drive with the damning footage felt like a weight, a silent promise of truth, waiting to be exposed. But it was not just the digital evidence that spurred her on, it was the silent determination of every lost soul, every hushed voice of Elkhorn that demanded justice. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of decay and neglect. The entry hall, once opulent, now resembled a mausoleum for forgotten dreams. Broken furniture lay scattered, draped in tattered cloths that hinted at past elegance. Claire moved cautiously, her flashlight beam slicing through the gloom and revealing faded portraits and dusty relics that seemed to watch her every move. Each step stirred memories of a time when the mansion was a symbol of power, a place where deals were brokered in hushed tones and secrets were sealed behind closed doors. It wasn't long before she found a narrow staircase leading to a basement that smelled sharply of mold and rust. The air grew colder as she descended, the oppressive silence punctuated only by the distant drip of water. The basement was cluttered with old filing cabinets, yellowed papers, and the detritus of lives long past. Among the scattered boxes and forgotten belongings, Claire discovered a hidden door marked with a faint, almost imperceptible emblem, a wolf's head, carved into the wood so delicately that it appeared almost reverent. The insignia matched those from the letters and the pages of the notebook, a signature that had haunted her investigation. Pushing the door open, Claire entered a small, windowless room. The only light came from a single, bare bulb that swung slowly from the ceiling. On a rickety table lay a bundle of documents, meticulously arranged as though prepared for inspection. With gloved hands, she began to sift through them. There were financial records, contracts, and a series of internal memos that detailed clandestine meetings between prominent local figures, names she recognized from the old case files and the notebook she had discovered at the mill. Among the documents was a final report, unsigned and heavily redacted, that referenced Operation Nightfall. The title itself sent a shiver down her spine, a code name that seemed to encapsulate decades of deliberate cover-ups. As she scanned the documents, a faint creak echoed from the corridor. Instantly, Claire's heart pounded in her ears. She turned slowly, her flashlight beam sweeping across the narrow space. A man stood there, tall, gaunt, his face partially hidden by shadows and a battered hat. His eyes, dark and troubled, met hers for a split second before he bolted into the darkness. Without hesitation, Claire chased after him, her boots slapping against the cold concrete floor. The corridors of the mansion twisted and turned like a labyrinth, each corner promising both escape and danger. Rainwater seeped in through cracks in the stone, mingling with the dust and grime of neglect. Finally, she cornered him in a small antechamber. The man's shoulders slumped in resignation, his earlier defiance replaced by a palpable sense of defeat. In that charged moment, the corridors of the past and present converged. "Who are you?" Claire demanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. He hesitated, then, as if burdened by years of regret, he spoke in a low, tremulous tone. "I'm John Dawson. I used to work here. I was part of it all. I didn't know what I was part of until it was too late." John's confession spilled out in fragmented sentences. He told her of secret meetings, of powerful men who had manipulated town affairs for their own gain, and of a network that had silenced anyone who threatened to unveil the truth. He admitted that on that fateful night, the night Angela Moore disappeared, the mansion had served as a meeting point for those determined to bury the past. Angela, he explained, had inadvertently become collateral damage. She had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and when she spoke too loudly about the irregularities in the books, they decided she had to be removed. John's eyes glistened with tears, and his voice broke as he recalled how he'd been ordered to ensure that no one would ever find the evidence. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he whispered, remorse threading every word. "I was just a small cog in a machine run by men who wore respectability like a mask. They made sure that no one would remember Angela. They buried her truth along with her." Claire absorbed every word, her mind racing with the implications. Here was the link she had been searching for, a confession that tied the old conspiracy to the present, connecting the hidden grave, the letters, the wolf symbol, and now the shattered life of Angela Moore. Who else was involved, she pressed, knowing that every name he uttered would draw her deeper into the web of corruption that had haunted Elkhorn for decades. John hesitated, then muttered a list of names: local businessmen, law enforcement officers, even a few politicians whose faces still graced the town's faded billboards. The name Marcus Eldridge, the man whose cold smile had haunted their earlier meeting, was the most prominent on the list. His role, John revealed, was that of a silent orchestrator, one who had financed the operations and ensured that every loose end was tied up with brutal efficiency. As John continued his confession, a sound from outside made both of them freeze, a muffled shout, followed by the rapid footsteps of someone running. Claire's heart pounded as she motioned for John to hide behind a stack of old crates. With the stealth of a predator, she edged toward the door, every nerve on high alert. The hall outside was dimly lit by the flickering bulb in the corridor, shadows dancing in unpredictable patterns. A figure emerged, clad in a dark jacket, face obscured by a hood. It was the man from the quarry, the one whose brief, desperate encounter had first hinted at a wider conspiracy. His eyes darted around, scanning the environment with an intensity that suggested he knew exactly what was at stake. Claire's mind raced as she realized that the final players in this twisted drama were converging in this very moment. Before she could react, the hooded man spoke, his voice a low rasp that resonated with authority. "You shouldn't have come here, detective." The tone was calm yet laced with menace, a clear warning from someone who felt cornered. Claire stepped forward, her voice unwavering despite the tension that crackled in the air. "I'm here for the truth. No one can keep it hidden forever." The words, resolute and fierce, echoed in the narrow space. "What did you do with Angela Moore?" Who ordered her silencing? The man's hood shifted slightly, revealing eyes that were hard and unyielding. For a moment, silence reigned, a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to compress the space around them. Finally, he spoke again, his words deliberate. Angela Moore was a mistake. A risk we couldn't afford to take. She got too close to the truth. But if you really want to know, then you'll have to dig deeper. The people you're chasing aren't all here. Some remain in the shadows. Before Claire could press further, a sudden commotion erupted outside, the sound of shattering glass and frantic voices. The delicate balance of the confrontation shattered in an instant. In the chaos, the hooded man melted away into the darkness, leaving Claire alone with John and the fragments of a confession that now felt both incomplete and damning. Breathing hard, Claire returned to John, her resolve hardened by the confrontation. "You need to tell me everything," she said, her tone now less interrogative and more determined. "I need the full story." John, trembling, resumed his narrative with a sense of urgency. There was a plan, a meticulous plan to bury not only Angela but anyone who might jeopardize the secret. "I was there that night, and I saw the fear in their eyes. They knew that if the truth came out, it would unravel everything they'd built. They decided then and there that any loose ends had to be tied, permanently. The final pieces fell into place as John described how the cover-up had stretched from the high-rise offices in the city to the back alleys of Elkhorn. The conspiracy was vast, and Angela Moore's death was just one thread in a tapestry of deceit, greed, and calculated ruthlessness. The documents in the basement, the wolf symbol, the hidden grave, it was all part of a meticulously engineered plan to rewrite history, to silence the voices that dared to question the status quo. For a long moment, silence reclaimed the room. The only sound was the steady drip of rainwater seeping in through the cracked walls, as if nature itself was mourning the burden of hidden truths. Claire's mind was a whirlwind of revelations, each one more shocking than the last. Every secret John had shared painted a picture of a town where power and corruption had ruled unchecked for decades, where lives were disposable in the relentless pursuit of control. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice firm and resolute. "John, you've done enough. I'm going to take this all to the DA and the state authorities. It's time that those responsible for all this were held accountable." Her words carried the weight of a promise that the secrets of Elkhorn would no longer be consigned to the darkness. John's eyes filled with a mixture of relief and despair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted any of this to happen. But now, it's too late for me." Outside, the storm seemed to break as the first tentative rays of dawn pierced the gloom. Claire led John out of the basement, carefully securing the documents and evidence that would soon topple decades of carefully constructed lies. As they emerged into the pale light of morning, the mansion behind them stood as a silent monument to a past that was about to be unmasked. In the ensuing days, the investigation exploded into a maelstrom of arrests, media scrutiny, and public outrage. Marcus Eldridge, along with several other key figures implicated in the cover-up, found themselves facing charges that rippled through the very foundations of Elkhorn society. The town, once steeped in silence and resigned acceptance, awoke to a reckoning that reverberated in every street and whispered conversation. Detective Claire Behrens, exhausted yet resolute, watched as the threads of a decades-old conspiracy unraveled in a blaze of indictments and confessions. The wolf, a silent symbol that had guided a frightened boy and led her to buried truths, became a potent reminder that sometimes, the most elusive guardians are those who watch over the forgotten and the lost. In the aftermath, as justice began to take shape and the wounded town of Elkhorn started the slow process of healing, Claire stood by Angela Moore's hidden grave one final time. The one secret resting place, now a memorial marked by community vigils and quiet reverence, testified to a life cut short by cruelty and corruption. The earth, long shrouded in silence, had finally given voice to its secrets. Standing there, beneath a sky clearing from the storm, Claire felt both the sorrow of countless untold stories and the quiet triumph of truth finally emerging from the shadows. The journey had been perilous, the cost high, but in exposing the darkness, Elkhorn had taken its first tentative step toward redemption. The legacy of that fateful night, the wolf's guidance, the desperate confessions, and the long-hidden records reminded everyone that while power may conceal the truth for a time, the relentless pursuit of justice will eventually force it into the light. And for Detective Claire Behrens, the case had become more than just an investigation. It was a testament to the resilience of those who refused to let history be rewritten by fear. As the sun climbed higher, casting long, hopeful shadows over the town, Claire turned away from the grave, her heart heavy but her spirit unbowed. The path ahead was still uncertain, and the scars of the past would take time to heal, but one thing was clear: in Elkhorn, no secret could remain buried forever.